In this video, I share my inspiring conversation with Eric Zala of the famous Raiders adaptation. Let's do this. Before we start, I want to say a big thank you to our patrons. This video is dedicated to Thorvald, Nick Massey, Melly Early, and Christopher Inlow. I can't thank you enough for supporting our work and helping us maintain this channel. If you haven't seen our Patreon page, be sure to check the link in the description box and head over there to see how you can help with ITHACA Season 2. In 1982, Eric Zala was a middle schooler who made a shot-for-shot remake of Indiana Jones' Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I mean every shot. The burning of Ravenwood's bar, the boulder sequence, crawling under the truck, and the Well of Souls. He created it with his two friends over 7 years in his mother's basement. But the one scene they couldn't film was the fight on top of the Nazi flywing. That was the one scene they weren't able to finish. Until 25 years later. They came back to finish it. And at this point they had jobs and families and so many more responsibilities. But they came back together for the joy of filmmaking. Their adaptation somehow made it to the hands of Eli Roth, who helped release it to a much wider audience, and it has now become a true gem in cinema history and has been dubbed the greatest fan film ever made. It's like the Goonies of filmmaking. When I was acting in my first film in college, I had heard about the Raiders adaptation. It was like a secret code between filmmakers. Did you hear about the kids who did the shot-for-shot remake of Indiana Jones? It was such an inspirational message to me, and yet I hadn't even seen the movie. I couldn't get my hands on it. I didn't even know where to look. The message of dedication and tenacity to complete a project, no matter how long it takes, that was a real driving force to me while we were making ITHACA. It was only through happenstance that I was finally able to get my hands on the adaptation and to actually have this conversation with Eric Zala. His story is absolute rocket fuel for the filmmaker. He's a generous, humble, talented family man. In this conversation, we covered a variety of topics from Indiana Jones to the adventure genre. We talked about one of his screenplays, and he really helped me with one of the problems that I was really struggling with while I was writing the pilot episode for ITHACA Season 2. I've put a link to his website below so that you can get your hands on the video adaptation as well as the documentary that was made about their journey. I've also put a time code to the topics below, so I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, man. That means a lot. I never anticipated this thing that we did in my mom's basement, just for ourselves. Never would have imagined that it would have affected folks' years, but I'm so grateful. Thank you, man. By the way, ITHACA looks great, by the way. I've been checking out Respect. You did it, man. You're creating. Learning from Spielberg, as you said, you know, when we started when we were 11 and 12 respectively. Chris was 11, I was 12, and then Jason joined us a year later, you know, about the same age. And if, you know, we had never imagined, like I said, that any of this was to happen, else we might have endeavored to do an original work, but we just did this. Our motivation was purely for fun. And in doing so, looking back on it with the benefit of hindsight, I can't think of a better learning tool to learn filmmaking, having done it organically first, and then I went after that to NYU Film School,
Right.
Having been bit, of course, by the filmmaking bug. And so I learned it organically first and then methodically. And, you know, it's kind of like akin to tracing the footsteps of the masters, you know.
Exactly.
Reverse engineering in a way, because we sort of studied it. I mean, of course, Raiders wasn't released the first year, so we kind of like, you know, studied this illicit recording, like Dead Sea Scroll, you know, scholars, the scholars poured over the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, that kind of. You have to be obsessed, you know, and have something a yardstick to kind of compare yourself to, in terms of, all right, not matching up to what we saw, you know. That's a real advantage. It kind of holds your feet to the fire in a way. For example, you can't just cut that pesky boulder sequence because you can't figure out 4 years now and counting how to do the damn boulder. Hey, let's just cut it. But doing a remake, you know, Spielberg's remake, folks are going to notice. So in a way, the exercise of remaking was really powerfully instructive. Now, when I went on later to NYU and I learned about coverage, that, okay, you know, there were more shots that Spielberg had in the editing room to work with, and of course what we saw was the best of. But again, you know, it comes, the reverse engineering brings the artifice, the mechanisms into focus in terms of that. So grateful for that in terms of getting a being held to a high bar in terms of look, you know. About 2 years in, the Laserdisc came out, and we finally could see the movie instead of just, you know, imagine or remember it.
Right.
And like, oh, we get to see it now. And it's like, okay, now I see where we fell short. Harrison is backlit. That's why it looks so cool. Ours is flat, you know. Okay, so lighting, actually, lighting counts for a lot. Composition, blocking, acting. And so kind of film school on the fly, as it were. So that was instructive. Then
as you were doing that, I mean, like, as you were watching it on Laserdisc, were those things that you just kind of noticed, or were those things like, as you were reviewing it, you're like, I'm going to specifically look and see like how he composes to this one shot and how the camera moves, how he likes to do, like how he does those long takes, or like, did you start noticing those things?
Well, composition was my focus when I sat down and did the storyboards, which were my this was actually my original master Xerox, if you can imagine, of my 602 storyboards. So, and I had done the composition by memory for the most part. Because Raiders wasn't out. So, and then later on, that became kind of our easier to flip through our published version later that we did for Kickstarter backers. Back in the day. So composition wise, I'd already kind of nailed that down, and that freed me up, I think, to watch. And to answer your question, it wasn't deliberately analytical, but it did kind of like subconsciously. It's like, wait a minute. You know, and it's kind of like you study something long enough and you see, okay, then the different dimensions to it. Sure, so there's the composition dimension, but there's also, like I said, lighting is very powerful. And then, you know, we saw how important music and sound is later on. We had something of an editing room mutiny near the end, and our film almost didn't get finished, you know, close to the finish line over how much work to give the sound. But it's one of those battles worth fighting, because as a filmmaker, you know, I mean, sound is so powerful.
Right.
I've got a dog-eared copy of Making of Raiders Lost Ark and whatnot, and you know, I knew that he was very collaborative. Heck, you know, like for example, the eyelids girl, the detail in the college scene where, you know, the first director, David Tomlin, had an idea in the shower that morning. He mentioned to Spielberg on the set, and Spielberg said, great idea, and he worked it in, you know. For us, we couldn't find a spider monkey in Mississippi in the 80s for some reason, so, and I storyboarded a kitten, but Chris said, how about Snickers?
Snickers,
yeah, okay. And, you know, the solution to the problem is one of the, you know, the best things, right? Much like Harrison in that well-known anecdote, you know, pulling and shooting the Arabian swordsman, you know, becomes the biggest laugh of the film. Innovation leads to creativity, and I think that's one of the many, many lessons that Spielberg taught. The most important thing is you have to want the same things, you know, true in any marriage, of course. You know, Cass reminded me, you weren't worried about what everyone would think, when you were kids. You just did this for yourself. And and it's like, yeah, we're worried about what the world thought. We just did this for ourselves, and that's the purest motivation so I called up Chris and said, you know what? All right, I'm in. Let's do this. Let's do the airplane scene. So it was actually originally through family that, there was a crucial pivot point there. And then later on, of course, as well, they have to know what they're getting into. Hence the video. Nice video that your wife made, by the way.
Yeah.
Good job. It takes a lot of strength, a lot of understanding and patience.
Right.
To support someone in the family who's, because to do it well, you have to be obsessive and you have to give it what it needs to do well. It's kind of like, well, making a baby, that you want to grow up well in the world. Cass even was my production manager.
Oh, wow.
So this is from the set, our production meeting.
That's
there on the set. So I dedicated the storyboards book to her for that, because nobody accomplishes anything in this life, I've come to reflect, by ourselves. It's we can, as kind of touched on in the documentary, it's through kind of joining forces with others that we can accomplish something bigger than we could by ourselves. And helps us accountable and whatnot. Also fueling me is that my son, Quinn, whom we meet in the documentary, he like a school assignment, what would you do if you got $1 million or $100,000? He said, I would give it to my dad to like finish his childhood dream. This was at this time that we just launched the Kickstarter campaign. It's like, I have to do this. I mean, if not for myself, I'm really, and, but you feel the pressure of that. And, there's a candid moment in the documentary where it, it gets to me, and you have to kind of, one thing that didn't change between then and now is it's a battle of the spirit primarily, and you have to push away those voices of self-doubt that say you're never going to finish, it's not going to be any good, nobody's going to care, you're going to let your son down, and fight through that. And that's, so much had changed, but that was a constant. And that's an internal thing that, of course, the more you do and show yourself that, you can do this, that it becomes easier and easier to push those voices of fear away and just do and create and lose yourself in the joy of creating.
One of the films that I think I really enjoyed was Hearts of Darkness. So
me too. I showed that to my son Quinn. Double feature with Apocalypse Now. I love that too.
Yeah, and I mean, when I had been, just when I was in the library in college and just trying to watch every video that I can and came across it, just like, I think one of the things that his wife had said was just like, it's scary to see, like not knowing what to do when you see your husband in the darkest point of their life. The battling of the passions, the battling of the tenacity, and the relationship of like what you're supposed to do as to help pull someone out of their hole, but also hold them accountable without letting them completely just crumble apart. And I think that's something that just really stood out for me, just watching the documentary and seeing everything that you were battling with, just the negotiation at work and
challenging times.
Absolutely, and just seeing just how high the stakes were with now that we're older, we have families, we have responsibilities, but we're also just so tied to the this trying to finish that what you've been dedicating so much of your life to.
Well said. And I was that call when I've shown this film in front of a lot of audiences, double feature, and everyone responds very powerfully to the phone call with my ex-boss. Seems a lot of folks can relate to that tension, and challenge. So I'm very, very instructive. And yeah, as a father, as a provider, you really want to, and I'd sacrificed, I had to be away from my family, sending paychecks home for a year and a half in order to get that job. So that's how high the stakes were for me personally.
Yeah.
I ultimately wound up leaving it, but I learned through that, that life is short. But in that moment, there too, Cass, and you see it in the documentary, said, you got to finish this. And it's life is made up of certain moments, and I feel good about the decision I made. As heart was in my throat and all that, and feeling like I was going to lose my job, even though I had plenty of untouched PTO, but it was the culture of the place that you just shouldn't be away for very long. When I decided to leave that job and sell the house, and we actually toured around the country, my family and I, in a 65 city tour in a Raiders RV with a dog.
That's so cool.
Great way to show the kids the world.
Yeah.
But it's like, do we roll the dice and put it all on the line? And ultimately, we decided that we want to model for our kids, not making choices based on fear, but on hope. It may work, it may fall apart, but do we want to model that you knuckle under to like fear of being tied to a job because you may not get something else again, or fear of loss, rather than achieving and accomplishing and proving that you can do it. I'm so glad that I got that support then, and things turned out as they did. So you find out in life as you go more and more what you want.
Yeah. Have you noticed that those lessons kind of like really being applied with your kids now?
Yeah, they're very unique kids, and very much choosing their own path, which I'm happy about. I haven't endeavored to push them into filmmaking. Let them choose their own obsession.
Right.
If it's a tent in the living room, for a year, I have a moral responsibility as a parent to let them do it. Thankfully, they don't seem to be setting each other on fire. Having your life marinated in Raiders in this classically adventure genre, Chris and I, at the time that we collaborated on and co-wrote What the River Takes, we wanted to meld what we loved, of course, about movies. Raiders was very much in our cinematic DNA, so adventure. And we grew up in the South, the deep South, Mississippi, and it was fertile ground for hanging off of trucks, driven by kids who may or may not have had their driver's license, and fits of fancy and 7-year obsessions remaking Raiders in the 80s. So it was a good place to grow up. I'd say because of, and it wasn't until later that we toured with our film that we realized that, well, the Deep South itself is considered sort of exotic. Oh, you're from Mississippi, not just the shameful racist past, which, folks realize, okay, no, I'm not racist just because I'm from Mississippi. But also, there is a romantic lyrical past to it. I mean, you see it in Twain, Faulkner,
Right.
And it was that we drew upon, which I think you probably picked up in the concept art. So it was a hybrid genre. First ever, to our knowledge, Southern Gothic action adventure.
Right.
So we wanted to meld the aesthetic of a Southern Gothic with the adventure. And one thing about the adventure genre, and clearly you love it too, I do too, is I think sometimes, not always, but the sense of the exotic, in terms of the spectacle, the locations and whatnot. And there are so many amazing places. I have actually, having lived in New York and Los Angeles, Orlando, and most recently Vegas, I returned to my hometown. This is, I'm back in Ocean Springs, seeing my kids before they disappear to college in a few years.
Yeah.
And I don't know, something about this place makes me hanker to tell a story again, and part of it is that sense of place. So yeah, in making What the River Takes, we wanted to incorporate that with the kinetic action of the film that we loved. So to your question about how did we come up with the set pieces and whatnot, Chris and I did brainstorming sessions. We would fly down here, we'd lock ourselves in a room all day with Red Bull and snacks and a laptop, and hammer some things out. And having a writing partner has both benefits and challenges. You can butt heads, but also you can spark off each other, even if it's okay, not like that, but how about this? And maybe you want to, so that was fruitful for us in terms of, broad strokes, thinking, okay, a barge sequence would be really great. But some of the stuff I'm proudest of are stuff that I thought of later, like our heroes travel upriver. One of the heroes works in a gator farm, and they have to get out in the middle of the night. And so their vessel upriver, this tacky gator boat with a fiberglass gator on the top, tourist tram, right, basically. Anyway, so much, even if it never gets made, I'm very proud of the world that we created. And because it feels like it did, hit those chords of excitement from our childhood when I was in that darkened theater seeing Raiders and Temple of Doom and other movies that really, really moved me.
Well, I think, it's, as I'm writing this second season for ITHACA, it takes place in Bali, Indonesia.
Oh, wow.
And because I grew up in Jakarta, Indonesia. And
oh, wow.
It's something where we did a lot of traveling as a kid, just around the world to Egypt, to Petra. And that was just kind of,
wow.
So like watching, Indiana Jones, like all of that felt so tangible to me because, just being in those places and having, a whole road just dedicated to these antiques from Indonesia, just right across the street, just felt like you were walking into this tomb. So with Bali, and as I'm writing this, the second season, something that I noticed about that adventure genre is just like really trying to pick apart just what is it about the location itself that, your adventure can only take place in this area. Like when I was seeing the all the concept art that you did, the gators, the barge,
right.
You're not having just a regular car chase, you're
right.
having a chase that's on top of rickshaws or something that's just like
right.
Only this location can provide something like this specific to where to the world that you guys have created.
Well, some of that, like for example, the Wheel of Crosses, the set piece with this huge rotating wooden cross
with the thief on there.
Yeah. That came about through Chris and I do some preliminary location scouting. Called up some film commissioners in the northernmost part of the state and spent like a couple days driving around. And one of the locations that they showed us had these remains of a bridge years ago, and so these like giant gravestones sticking out of the water, these former columns supporting a bridge. I took photographs of that and just daydreamed and imagined, well, what could we do with this? What fun could we have with this? And that, I think, is the really key thing, is getting in touch with that as you're in the writing process, that inner fun child part of you that said, what would be cool is if our hero does this, and that's, I'm inspired by, and apparently the morning of them doing the airplane scene, the original airplane scene, Spielberg walked around and blocked it that morning. He had done preliminary ones, but this is my director's notebook, by the way, from the airplane scene.
Yeah.
And I think he had that sense of fun in his head, and that That's the wave you want to catch.
So as you were writing that, did you scout locations first and then kind of build scenes around some of those like set pieces? Or
in tandem, they kind of overlapped, and then it took form, being open and revising, and being willing to iterate and to throw out stuff, even if you've invested a good bit of work into it, if it doesn't work. And so we would write, location scout, and then inspiration from that would seep into the writing, and then it would evolve further from there. Once we did finished the script and identified the best set pieces that could sum it up visually, because we knew that was how Star Wars got approved, was through concept art, of course.
Yeah.
Ralph McQuarrie's original drawing of Darth Vader,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you have to have kind of fuel to, push on through, and that was such stories of our heroes, Spielberg, Lucas, those great things that kind of keeps you going,
Yeah.
Talking about the adventure genre, the supernatural and the spiritual realm, I think one of the reasons why the first 3 Indiana Jones films work better than the 4th one, which switches from supernatural to paranormal, aliens instead of, and there's so much more power, I think, in the former. So I think that's working in your favor. Now, as you kind of struggle with how to portray this, and it sounds like you want to be true to, to the myth, to the, one way to go is maybe it's sides of the same coin. As it happens, at NYU, I majored in film and television production. I minored in religious studies, actually. So I'm fascinated by that too.
Yeah.
There's so many faiths that hold, there's no true angels or devils. We are really, there's good and bad in all of us. And it's a struggle. And maybe it's so with your antagonist too. Maybe it's, and isn't the most interesting villains that you can kind of see their side of it. I mean, heck, even a very mainstream movie like Avengers, Thanos is such a great villain because, like, okay, I can kind of see his perspective. He's not entirely unsympathetic. So I mean, maybe there's an opportunity for you to make it really great.
Right. And as you were kind of structuring your protagonist throughout your story, I mean, were there certain things that you want? Because I'm sure, like, you wanted to be able to create someone who's just this, iconic protagonist. Yeah. So, like, were you kind of following kind of like a Joseph Campbell stages of the hero?
Actually, yes. We pulled up Joseph Campbell quite a bit and read up on the hero's journey. Amazing stuff, and of course, read on how. And as Lucas went to Campbell and said, with Star Wars, am I getting it right? And is that why it's such an enduring space opera? I think so. I think it resonates for that. So yes, that can be kind of great inspiration and as you kind of digest that and see locations and as you've been doing research movies that you love, and it's the brain synthesizes it. I mean, I'm inspired and encouraged by the fact that even the original Raiders was not original, obviously, it was a remake, of course, of the adventure serials of the 30s that
absolutely,
Spielberg loved, and there's truly nothing new under the sun. It's all reimagined in new and hopefully fresh ways that, kind of like ingredients in a dish. Maybe you can invent a new recipe with some great ingredients. Have you seen Secret of the Incas?
No, not that one.
So it's out of print, and actually the rumor goes it was kind of suppressed because it is probably the single greatest inspiration for Raiders. in that Charleston Heston is the hero, and he has a trademark brown leather jacket and brown fedora, and there's even a scene that calls forth the map room scene where, you know, the shaft of light hits something and reveals the secret location. That's in there.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah. So reportedly Spielberg screened it for his crew beforehand and said, "This is kind of what we're going for."
Mm-hmm.
That said, it is like embryonic in terms of Raiders. There's not one but two musical numbers in the movie, and it lacks the kinetic action of Raiders. There's no exciting truck scene or airplane scene. It's kind of sedentary in that way, but there's some great stuff. But in that, I guess my point in sharing that, aside from the cool tidbit, is that kinetic action, I think, is part of it too. That kind of pulse quickening excitement of, you know, running from the boulder, you know, or sliding underneath just as the stone slab, you know, slams shut. That, I think, is hallmark adventure. Or Douglas Fairbanks leaping off into the pirate sail and sliding down with his knife, you know.
Right.
Daring do, I guess.
I was watching Alan Quartermain's I can't remember which one it was. Alan Quartermain's King Solomon's Mines. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, it's very, very, very cheesy. Richard Chamberlain, I think that was his name. Richard Chamberlain.
I think so. Yeah.
And you know, there were things that just weren't hitting the mark. Pinpoint accuracy every time he fired that gun. You know, it was you know, the idea of having this character who can be limited physically by what he's able to do, I think just makes it much more gripping to just see someone who's 78 trying to crawl under that door before it closes. I think that just makes it much more nail-biting, you know?
You know, that's a really great point, Jay. In fact, it reminds me of, I think, one of the most salient observations that people have made about Raiders, why the original Raiders works, is that even though Harrison Ford is, you know, real young in that one, his hero gets hurt, you know, he gets punched. Oof, it hurts. You know, he's, to your point, he's not always shoot straight, this impervious Superman. No, he fails. He gets punched. In that way, it feels more vulnerable. And I hope that they really kind of continue that. And I'm sure they will. James Mangold, though, there's only one Spielberg. He's a great director. Loved Ford versus Ferrari, and pretty much guy hasn't really made a bad film that I can think of. So it feels like we're in good hands.
Wonderful. Yeah, 3:10 to Yuma was wonderful. And, you know, I was watching when I was rewatching Raiders a few weeks ago, actually one of my favorite sequences is the battle inside the car where, you know, you see him get shot and just hitting the guy on the steering wheel, because there's something about, you know, the camera that's, you know, just hanging right outside that window, the crunching of the leather of his jacket, that everything feels so much more intense in that sequence for some reason. And when you see the blood spurt out, there's something that just feels so much more tangible about that action sequence.
Right, I know exactly what you mean. That is
confined space that they're in, and it was great to see that in your
perfect.
Adaptation. You know, it was just like
thanks.
Yeah,
we loved that scene. That 76 shot sequence of the truck scene took us weeks, but talking about, you know, fire that burns. I mean, we really, really loved that scene and wanted to see Chris go under the truck. It was terrifying and, you know, ill-advised, and thank God nobody got hurt. But yeah, and of course we were dirty. It was hot. Chris, you know, wearing leather gloves and all this in sweltering Mississippi summer, nearly had heat stroke. But goddamn, it was worth it.
Yeah, you know?
Pain is temporary, film is forever. One of my favorite quotes.
Absolutely. It looked so damn cool.
Oh, thanks.
It's awesome that you guys pulled that off.
But yeah, the original by Raiders, yes. Mickey Moore was the director that shot that, and they shot that simultaneously with the airplane scene. It's one of the few that Spielberg actually didn't shoot hands-on. He entrusted second unit director Michael Moore, and just nailed it. Tactile is the word that comes to mind, like you said. You know, you feel the dust and the dirt and the grit, and it is just riveting. Chris and I were the first years we were groping around in the dark of how do you remake a $22 million movie on your allowance. You know, we would like in building this covering on the back of his grandfather's truck. You know, would be interrupted by the need to like improvise fight sequences and stuff. You know, we were kids, so young when we started. But again, harking back to, it's about the fun. You know, that's the nuclear fusion going on. Great question. You know, I think one of the things, as I mentioned, that was different that I learned doing Raiders then and now is the lack of self-consciousness. You know, we just did it for ourselves, you know, growing up as kids. And in that sense, we were isolated. You know, as far as we knew, no one else in the world, you know, ever had this idea. Come to, you know, find out touring over a decade later and screenings like, I did the same thing, you know, we just didn't take it as far as you guys, you know. But so many people understood, you know, that impulse. But it was, in terms of being isolated, I think it's a nice thing in a way because it can be a benefit because I think first and foremost, you have to make it for yourself. I mean, sure, as filmmakers, we make films ultimately for audiences, but I wouldn't have been the same had we been like, well, what's the world going to think again, you know, about this? Well, you're not thinking about the world. You're just immersed in having fun and doing it for yourselves and making it as cool and spectacular as you can because you want to see the finished thing, you know. And sure, you want to show it to your friends and family and rent out that local movie theater and maybe the local TV crew, you know. Sure, that's a cool pipe dream, but that was even Spielberg. As much as we want to see Spielberg, that was not the reason why we did it. You know, we didn't dare dream, just hope to finish. You know, like I said, no, is that I wanted to see our Indiana Jones running from our boulder, and I wanted to not be cute or adorable. I wanted to be cool, you know, and that's, you know, that's it. So I think in isolation, it's easier to lose yourself in that and not worry about what anyone else thinks. Use this time. Time is more so than money. You can get more money back, but you can never get more time back. So this time that we have in isolation is a gift, you know, where you can kind of cocoon and work on something until it's ready. And then, you know, you can polish it and then put your baby out into the world, which is scary, as you know, I'm sure. But that way, you know, better to have your creator hat. Then you can put that off and put your exhibitor hat on and then show it to the world. So anyway, that would be my advice. Just kind of a internal, external mindset. I hope that helps. I've come to reflect the best thing really, Jay, like of doing this and doing, you know, like, you know, this and stuff is getting to play with your friends, you know, you know, right. And talking film, I mean, and creating and making things that make you happy. And this is what life's about. So yes, I'm in. This is
my mountain. This is my hill where I die. You know? So it's like, this is my legacy. And it's so incredible that you have something like this that is just, it really is a legacy for you, your family, you know?
Thanks, man. Thank you. You know, the older I get, the more meaningful that becomes. Again, could have never planned for that, but I'm so grateful. And thanks. Yeah, it's funny. There's nothing more difficult, but nothing more satisfying than this weird endeavor. But I don't ever want to forget how it makes me feel. So anyway, thank you for that, man. You made my day, and appreciate that.